So thank you everyone for showing up tonight. I want to briefly introduce Miles Jordan here. I'm so glad that we've been able to connect after he finished up here at UAF and moved on. It's so great to see him presenting this work in gallery shows and exhibitions and getting a lot of talk about this work. So I really am glad to have him here. Uh, Miles Jordan is a self-taught photographer, educator, an University of Alaska Master of Fine Art graduate, as well as a New Orleans native who has experimented with digital, analog, and infrared photography. Additionally, he does anthropological research into culture and cameras. As a photographer, he has worked with a variety of different genres, including fashion, lifestyle, editorial, conceptual, sports, portraiture, analog, landscape, cityscape, street, infrared, and photojournalism. So kind of all over there. And that's really great to see someone that has that kind of breadth and range in their practice. I'm really excited to bring Miles Jordan to you. I was on his committee here, his MFA committee at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and really enjoyed watching this work mature over the course of several years and have a hand in really talking about what this work meant for him. And I'm so glad to have him here tonight to go ahead and talk about this passion project, which brings together his love of southern Louisiana and the frigid Arctic North together in diptych form. So without further ado, Miles Jordan.
Thank you, Jason. That was very nice. It's great to be back. I definitely miss the Alaska photo bunch a lot. I tell people that all the time. But so my name is Miles Jordan. Kind of covered a lot of that. I'm going to take you through kind of some more information about my background and kind of how I got into photography, and then we'll talk more explicitly about my show and my project 504907. I will say one thing before I start, because this is the only day that this will ever be possible to be said. New Orleans got like 8 inches of snow today. We set a record. It's never happened. And someone was saying that it was only like 30 somewhere in Alaska. And for once, we're tied. Doesn't happen ever. I've lived here since 1997 when I was born. Never happened like this. This is like totally a record. Maybe it's a bad thing, whatever. It's beautiful. It's a winter wonderland. So had to throw that out there first. But so these are these are all photos of me as a child with cameras. So I grew up in a kind of multi-artistic household. My father's a career musician. He's been a musician my whole entire life. He's toured all across the United States, including a couple summers ago, he toured in Alaska. And so my mom works in a law firm, but on the side, she would always take photos. And when I was a kid, so all of these photographs in particular, we would go down to different areas in southern Louisiana, a lot of old forts and old cemeteries and old all kind of things. My mom loved to do that, to do those types of travels, and I'm an only child, so she would just bring me along with her. And so my life has sort of always been related to cameras in some way, although it took me a very long time to actually get acclimated to the idea of being a photographer. Like a lot of these images of me, I don't know whatever happened to the images that I was taking. Which brings me to this. So Charles Mason, who I don't believe is in here, but he also works at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the photography department, and he was the chair of my committee. He always has a thing that he does in his classes where he introduces the first camera that he ever had, and we talk about it. So for me, as I said, I've been around cameras forever, but the decisive moment of my life basically was in the winter of 2016. My mom and I were going to London for the very first time, and she asked me if I wanted a camera. And I said that I wanted a camera that was going to work fast. I didn't know what fast meant, but now knowing the language, I wanted a good autofocus camera. What I was frustrated by as a kid was autofocus. Did I couldn't deal with the slowness of it. And so she got me this Panasonic DMC FZ 300, and it's a fixed lens camera, but you can zoom like it's like an old school kind of point and shoot, but in a DSLR body, but you can't, it's not actually a DSLR since you can't remove the bits. But so we went to London, photographed all over London, basically just photographed inside of museums mostly. And I came back home to Louisiana. I was going to Louisiana State University at the time. And I started to photograph my friends and I started to photograph the life around me. And I sort of just started getting the ball rolling. And so these are some of the very first images that I ever took with that Panasonic camera. The side uh, portraits of the people were literally like 5 days after I got the camera. I went to the New Orleans City Park and photographed at night using an on body flash. The two images, the lady with the bow and arrow, and then the two women with the different signs, those were from a pro-life, no, not pro-life, pro-choice protest in New Orleans right after Trump's first inauguration. And then the far right images are images that I took inside of museums while I was in London. That was a lot of what I was doing at the time. I was kind of a novice to the practice, but I was definitely very intrigued and excited even back then. And so I ended up transferring schools. I went to the University of Louisiana Monroe for a while, but a lot of my photography happened outside of the classroom. So as Jason said earlier, I'm a self-taught photographer, although I did go get a degree. I did get an MFA in photography, and I surely did learn a lot. But in terms of learning just how to function with a camera, learning how to shoot sports, because I did a lot of that in college. I was a photojournalist most of my undergraduate career. That a lot of that was from YouTube U. I would just get on YouTube and learn how to do the specific thing I was looking at. But outside of the classroom and outside of sports, most of my photography has been centered around my parents. So my dad, as I got older, basically by the time I was like 15 or 16, we would start to travel to the West. My dad loves the West. And so when I was, I believe 15 years old, we went to the West and we came back home, and we were on the way back home, and he was telling me, it was the very last day we were there, and he was telling me that just look around, like remember that whatever the problems that you have in your small place, there's bigger issues. I was a angsty teenager not doing all that well, and he was trying to let me know that there's perspective, there's more to see in the world. And so after that year, he and I have spent some portion of every summer since traveling. I've been to 46 of the states, basically all because of him. I went to Nevada on my own, and I moved to Alaska on my own. But other than that, most of the states that I've been to have been with my dad. And then my mom, who's on the left, self-portrait that she took of herself, she and I would travel to coastal Louisiana. So I mentioned earlier that we would photograph southern Louisiana, and I was 8 years old when Hurricane Katrina, that's not true, I was 7 years old, almost 8 years old when Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans. And I grew up in an area of New Orleans that didn't get particularly damaged by flooding, but we got a lot of wind damage. And I had many friends who lost their whole homes, everything. And so my mom and I would actually travel to these coastal areas before Katrina, and we would look around and we would photograph. And after Katrina, we started to do the same thing because my mom wanted to go check back on places that she had known and loved. And one of the more profound moments of my life that really actually is one of the biggest drivers of my 504 907 series as is going back to places in coastal Louisiana and them physically be gone. Not like people had to move away, not cultural change, but I mean the physical plot of land no longer being a tangible piece of land. It was a very profound thing for me as a small kid. I've always had an existential crisis in my head about New Orleans won't be here forever. That's my belief in my mind, right? The Army Corps of Engineers is committed to holding up the levees in New Orleans till about I want to say it's 2076, something like that. So there's like a finite timeline in theory of what New Orleans is, and that's been in my brain forever. And one of the early reasons that I got intrigued with Alaska as a place of contrast, besides just the extreme of weather, was when I was a mid-teenager, New Orleans gets the BP oil spill. And where I went to middle school, is right at the crescent of the river. So when they would burn the oil off, when they would burn it or do whatever to try to dispose of it, I could smell it. I remember going to school, and I would walk to school. My mom stopped driving very early on, so I would walk everywhere. And so I would walk and I would smell that every day. And it made me very apparent to what had happened to Valdez. And it just sort of changed my mind on how we all related to one another. And I think my dad's whole ethos of telling me there's something bigger than you, it like got me closer to this idea of like, okay, Louisiana has this existential crisis, but it's not just Louisiana. You know, it's places all across the country and across the world. This is actually the oldest photograph of mine that I have been able to like assuredly source. This image, I believe I was 7 or 8 when I took this image. When I found this, so I actually, a lot of this slideshow is borrowed from my thesis defense slideshow. And one of the things I was trying to show in that slideshow was my old images. And when I came across this, what I thought was so striking is I would still take an image like this to this day. So it's kind of funny, like me at 9 shooting the same way as me at 27. It's just a sort of funny bit of life. And these are some of those very early images when I went to New Mexico. So this is from that very first trip out west. You know, a lot of like shooting out the side of a car and hoping you get something good. And I mean, I'm pleased with a couple of them. And so I'll also talk about some of my influences. Some are very personal, some are more just I found in a photo book and realized that their work is very similar to mine. So outside of my parents, this man, the man on the right walking on the barricade, his name is Chris Granger. He's actually one of my dad's college roommates, but he's worked for Knoll.com / the Times Picayune as a photojournalist for 28 years, basically my whole entire life. And Chris is a close family friend. And so Chris has influenced me just by, I realized that you could have a camera everywhere and you could capture life, and that wasn't really a weird thing. And Chris has been an exhaustive resource for any questions I've had. And it's been an absolute blessing, but he's also kind of why I try to find the humor in a lot of images. Chris to me has this knack for creating humor in an image and for like showcasing the personality of people, maybe not like an individual person, but people as a whole in each image. So here are some images. He did a photo series on the St. Augustine High School Marching 100 brass band or marching band, which is to the New Orleanians who are in this, who are listening from here. They know the Marching 100 is one of the most important high school marching bands, period. I mean, it's probably the best one. I mean, it's contentious depending upon who you ask. But what I meant about Chris showcasing life is in all of these images, you have the people front and center. Even the bottom left corner image where you get to really see what a Louisiana New Orleans street looks like. It's still about the people in the image. And so I realized with Chris that you can have all this atmosphere, you can have all these surroundings, but when you can center the people in it, it can really make for a more compelling image. One of the secondary people that I was influenced by is this photographer named Rosie Matheson. She made this magazine called Boys. It's not really a magazine, it's like a photo book. It's like yay thick. And she went across the world and took portraits of men and boys across the world, all on medium format, color negative film. I believe she's shot with a Mamiya RB67. And Matheson's work directly influenced me. I have an ongoing series that I've had that's an ethnography about the post-Katrina New Orleans generation, where I sit everybody down in this yellow chair and we use medium format. And so a lot of that part of my work is a direct influence from Rosie. I mentioned Charles earlier, but Charles is an exhaustive resource in this. I came to Alaska knowing how to take photos, but I didn't know much about the history of photography. I didn't know much about other photographers. I was sort of just blind. I knew a bunch of social media mumbo jumbo, but I didn't know anything else. And what I love so much about Charles is he has this career as a photojournalist forever. He starts a photojournalistic department, but then eventually he tapers off into fine art. And sometimes what you'll see with even in his photojournalistic work, in my opinion, is that it could still be fine art and vice versa. And so one of my favorite series of his is the reindeer herding series he did. I've always thought this overhead of all the reindeer is just like absurd to think this is so far before drones, right? He's in a helicopter or plane or something. Like it's super cool. But Charles also, I'll talk about a couple his historic photographers in a moment. And Charles is the one, he's the main reason I even know who these photographers are, to be totally honest. He allowed me to be in his archive and to look through all the litany of photo books that he has, and it truly was a blessing. So this is that Yellow Chair series that I was talking about that was similar to Rosie Matheson's work. Um, so these are some of the early diptychs. So when I got to Alaska, I moved from New Orleans. I had never lived in anywhere but Louisiana. Well, I guess I lived in Tennessee for 2.5 months after Katrina, but that doesn't really count. And so I moved to Alaska to get an MFA. And when I moved to Fairbanks, what I wanted to do was I wanted to compare climate refugees. I wanted to look at the Ile de Jean Charles people of southern Louisiana, and I wanted to look at the Yupik people of Alaska. And I realized very early, like, number one, resource wise, didn't have the resource. Number two, I didn't have the relationship with these people. I don't want to go into this place and just kind of bastardize a culture and the people. I didn't want to be that photographer. And so I sat with myself really 2 weeks before I left for Alaska, and I realized I had never photographed New Orleans. I'd moved away from New Orleans for college. When I got back, I wasn't much of a street photographer. I just did like photos for hire. So what I did was I took a 35 millimeter camera. I believe it was two Canon F1s, and I walked around my neighborhood. So the neighborhood I grew up in New Orleans is called the Carrollton Historic District. And so I've lived in the Carrollton area my whole life. It's about a mile. So the major, I guess, intersections would be Claiborne Avenue, and then a mile down is St. Charles. And you can go to the right and the left, and there's a bunch of blocks. But so what I did was I walked around. So like I told y'all earlier, I went to school and walked. I took streetcars and walked, like when I was in high school. And so I decided with myself, I just wanted to do that again. Let me fall in love with my city again and create some level of a documentation of what I've seen my whole life. Because I admittedly was fearful of leaving for 3 years and having everything change. The joke I tell all my friends is that I left New Orleans thinking that all the street work would be done by the time I was back, and it's worse. So on that front, I'm happy. So when I got to Fairbanks, I realized, okay, I'm not going to photograph climate refugees. That's not going to happen. So what do I do? And so I just walked around Fairbanks. So my first 2 years, I lived on campus. My first year, I didn't even have a car. So I just would leave from campus and I would walk down to Creamer's Field, or I walk down to downtown. It didn't matter if it was -20. It didn't matter if it was 0. I just would walk. There were some walks I was like, yo, you're not supposed to walk right here. I have several friends who saved me from several of these walks and picked me up. So I definitely got to appreciate them. And so here's some of the other early diptychs. At this point, I was shooting mostly 35 millimeter. I had hit a point in the summer of 2022. My dad and I toured like 25 different states, and I had about 100 rolls of film that I needed to personally develop. And I just got too overwhelmed. So actually, by the end of my series, I shot a lot of digital. There is some film still within the series. But so these are some of the early diptychs. Notice I hadn't decided on the distancing between the two images. I hadn't decided if it was going to be one on top of another or next to each other. I even had these black borders, which did not last. But these were the early ones. So after like my first year, these were kind of some of the diptychs I started to put together. So backtracking slightly, so to some of these other photographers that I started to learn about. There was a beautiful day in a graduate photography course where I walked in and Charles Mason gave me a book, and he went, look at this book. I was like, okay. And he asked me, he was like, who does this work remind you of? And I like looked for a second and I was like, it kind of reminds me of my own. And then LJ Evans came in. He asked the same question. She said the same thing. And so that photographer is William Eggleston. William Eggleston is a very famous color photographer from Mississippi. And he photographed just mundane life of the South and other places, but predominantly the South. He was the first photographer to have a solo show at MoMA of color photography. He's notorious for the very mundane imagery. And so as I started to realize that we're photographers that did it, I realized, okay, I'm onto something here. I can just create a documentation and take ordinary photos of a place and have it be meaningful. Another two photographers that really influenced my work, two other Southern photographers, William Christenberry, who did a large survey of basically old Alabama before Alabama modernized a little bit. He photographed a lot of old homes and old structures, which I love. It's what I do. It's a lot of what I do now in my practice in New Orleans, which is photographing New Orleans, because if I believe it's not going to be here one day, you might as well have a documentation. And then the other photographer that I really love is Gordon Parks. And what I love about Gordon Parks, beyond Kristen Berry and Eggleston, is I just love the way in which he showcases people, and in which, I mean, obviously Parks is showing predominantly Black African American people, and there's a beauty of showing that in the South that I think is really lost. One of my common gripes with like historic street photography is it's a lot of New York. I think there's a, not to say there's not other photos, there are, but there's so many beautiful and wonderful and really powerful cities and places in this country in particular, and just having it be some of these metropolitan areas only kind of feels like a waste. Um, but so kept traveling. My mom and I went down to the Mississippi River Delta. This photo on the right is a part of a diptych 504-907 Faith that I compared with a Bible store in Fairbanks. It's later on in the slides. It's actually the diptych of all of them that has done the best in terms of galleries. It's been in several, maybe a dozen or so different juried art shows. It's been in several museums. It's been really fun to showcase and gotten great feedback from it. My dad and I did the other extreme. So one of the extremes my mom and I did was to go down to the Mississippi River Delta. My dad and I did a Denali flight seeing tour, landed somewhere on the mountain range. And a big part of that was when I moved to Alaska, I knew that there was extreme difference from Louisiana, right? New Orleans is hot and humid. Fairbanks is cold and dry. And they're about as hot and humid and cold as dry as you could possibly get, right? You're not getting 100 with 100% humidity most places. And you're not getting negative 55 like anywhere. And so I realized I wanted to compare these extremes. I thought if I could create a through line between two of the most diametrically opposite places, maybe there could be something interesting there about like the kind of togetherness of all of us. These experiences, life, and these experiences of potential climate change and all these other things are important. And if we can bring people together by showcasing who we are, where we are, what we are, I feel like that's a powerful way of not having it all seem like doom and gloom. Like there is an existence of people. So what I got down to is I picked three different areas to focus on in 504-907. So 504-907 is a diptych comparison of ordinary elements of predominantly New Orleans, Louisiana, but some Southern Louisiana as well, and Fairbanks, Alaska, but also some of interior Alaska. So the three things that I decided to focus on in particular were dwellings. So that could be homes like this image, or it could be, a deli, like a neighborhood grocery store, a bar, a tattoo shop, a weed dispensary, stuff like that, stuff that people come together in that aren't just, but this was important for me, but it had to show the full roof. So the way that I distinguished images to kind of curate down my show, because I took something like 50,000 photos. So I had to really curate it down. I needed the whole roof in it for that to be a dwelling photo. And I'll explain, I'll explain more why in a second. So these next images are more of like the ordinary bits of life. What I have called them as of late is these are things that you would see on a walk. So if you took a walk within your neighborhood, this is something that you would see. And so I focused on dwellings, I focused on ordinary bits like a walk, and I focused on people. And I thought showcasing those three things could really kind of showcase what existence was like in these places. Obviously, it's not going to be exact, but having some type of representation I thought was nice. And so for the people in particular, this is a lot of street portraiture or just street photos in general. Just walking around different parts of Fairbanks, or obviously in this situation is Talkeetna, or walking around different parts of New Orleans. So this is one of the So these three diptychs did not make the final show, and so this is the first diptych that I'll talk about that actually made my final show, 504-907, the lights. And the thing that I appreciate about this photo more than maybe a lot of my diptychs, even if it's not the strongest one, is the top image, the long exposure of the Superdome and I-10. I actually took in 2018. Me and one of my buddies, Malik, there's an overpass in New Orleans called the Broad Overpass, and there's an area where you can walk for God knows what reason. It's honestly extraordinarily dangerous, but we decided we wanted to. We got a tripod, did the whole thing. And so part of the reason I thought it was so cool is you don't know where photos you take are going to go. Sometimes you take something on a day, like today we're having this literally having a snowstorm, which doesn't make any sense. And so I don't know where these snowstorm photos may go one day. But they may be meaningful. And so the top image showcases downtown New Orleans, I-10, and showcases the Superdome in the background. These are all things that are the biggest reasons why people come to New Orleans, quite frankly. I mean, yes, people come to Mardi Gras, and yes, people come to Jazz Fest, but if we counted for every single person that goes in and out the Superdome every year, that would be why people are in New Orleans more than everything. And in Fairbanks, at least in the wintertime, the reason people are coming is the Northern Lights. So I thought being able to juxtapose artificial light versus natural, supernatural kind of, natural light. I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition of how one of these places is much more, city and urban, and what one is much more rural, but these light components can still be a portion of what pushes industry. This second image is 504-907 primary walks. So the top image is of the Liberty Bar in Fairbanks. I lived near downtown Fairbanks, right off Cushman. And so I would walk around downtown Fairbanks. And this was one of the very close bars to my house. I actually, ironically, never went. I just photographed it. Whenever I go back to Fairbanks, it's high up on my priority list to go. And on the bottom is the Adams Street Grocery and Deli. I live on the corner, or not the corner, I live on Birch Street in between Burdett and Adams. So I walk down my block, take a right, walk 2-3 blocks down, and there's this grocery store and deli. You can buy po' boys. You can buy, I think that's really it. You can buy po' boys and you can buy some fried food. You can buy a po' boy, or you can get anything that you would get on a po' boy on a bun. So easy. But so these are two places that people go to that are parts of these communities that are really important. I called it primary walks because you have this juxtaposition of primary colors. So red, blue, and yellow. It's definitely one of my favorites. I used it as the show card. This next one is 504-907 chairs. So one of the things that I intentionally did when curating and creating my diptychs is I didn't want to have a continuous top and bottom. So I didn't want New Orleans or Louisiana to be the top every time, and I didn't want Alaska to be the top or the bottom every time. At some point, you have, like, if you make that decision, you have to investigate the power dynamic that you're saying there. Like, if you put one above the other, what does that mean? And so I wanted to keep the ambiguity, because for images like this, there may be a little bit more of a guess. This past image, right? Like, until today, New Orleans don't get snow like that, right? I have a photo of Adam Street from today that I wish I had already edited, but I'll eventually put on social media, that we got close to that amount of snow, but that doesn't happen, right? So you can tell easily here. But on 504-907 chairs, it's a little harder potentially. And so what I find interesting about the chair component too is the different material of the chairs. I feel like says a lot about the places. So to break the fourth wall, the top image is from Talkeetna. The bottom image is from New Orleans. And so you have all wood-based chairs. On the bottom, you have these plastic chairs and some wood chairs. I can almost promise you that wood chair on the far left rotted within a couple weeks of it being out there. It's just too humid. So this next image is 504-907 sunglasses. So kind of some of the humor here. As I was curating through all my images of people, these were definitely the hardest to put together because people aren't always doing the same things. But as I was looking in this image, everyone has sunglasses on. So the lady in the top left has the sunglasses on. The lady taking the selfie has sunglasses on. The lady in between her and that next lady has sunglasses on. The lady in the front has sunglasses on. And then the lady in the bottom also has sunglasses on. What I think is also important about these images is that they're both representations of tourism and a lot of the tourism that runs the two states. So at the bottom, you have Talkeetna Air Taxi. You can do all your flight seeing tours, your jump off for Denali. And the top image is from the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, which has been going on 54 years now and is one of the major music festival events in the city. And one of the things I knew before coming to Alaska that also proved true to me, I had a hunch that this would be true, and it proved to be truer than I thought it would, is that Alaska and Louisiana really are not that different. They're run off oil, tourism, and outdoors. Yes, it's more complex than that. There's things going on all across the place, but that functionally is what I've noticed is what goes on. The joke I make about Fairbanks is you see all the dudes in the big trucks, and it's like Arctic rednecks. It's really not all that different from being in Louisiana. I mean, even some of the culture around drinking and some of the partying stuff is pretty similar. It's rather interesting. This next image is 504 storefronts. So this is another one of these ones where you could take a walk and see this. What I think is so interesting about these two images is they showcase parts of culture. So if you look at the top image, you see the jester mask. If you're familiar with the Mardi Gras colors, you immediately see the Mardi Gras colors, purple, green, and gold. And on the bottom image at Michko's tailor shop, if you look real close at the sign, you know, it's custom tailoring, bridal alterations, suit alterations, leather and fur work, custom cusp book, Alaska parka patterns. You know, you get into these very particular things. I even think looking at what people actually wear is fascinating too, because it showcases some of these differences. I also thought with the top image, and I know Alaskans can also very much empathize with this. Potholes. We both got them. They're horrible. You know, it's not, if you want to drive in Alaska or Louisiana, it's not the most fun on your vehicle. So this next image, I mentioned this one earlier. So this is 504-907 Faith. The top image is from the Mississippi River Delta. My mom and I took a boat tour. We left out of Empire. No, that's not true. We left out of Venice, out of the Venice Marina. And so, in a lot of images, not in every image, you don't get to see the whole 360 of an image. But for this top one, if I had turned around in every direction, all it was water. Once upon a time, this area had land, marshy land, but land nonetheless, and this church was actually used. What happened is we dredged a significant portion of Louisiana's coastal wetlands, and they have deteriorated, degraded, and fallen off the face of the earth since. And then the top image is of Good News Bible and Bookstore. I think one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten that people love about this image is the for sale sign. You know, you have both of these religious-based places in these sort of transitory periods. The Bible store probably won't stay a Bible store. That church is definitely not gonna last. I would be fascinated to know if it's still there. Actually, I'm supposed to take another one of these boat tours later this year. So if I do and it's still there, I'll let y'all know. But I kind of doubt it. You know, I feel like a hurricane is just gonna knock that thing over. This next image is 504-907 One of a Kind. So this is a much more overt cultural reference, but Mardi Gras in New Orleans and the Yukon Quest, and really Mardi Gras in Louisiana and dog mushing period in Alaska are so unique to their individual states relative to our country. Yes, there's carnival across the world, and I know Mobile has Mardi Gras, and I know there's dog mushing in other parts of the world, but these overt celebrations, these overt like cultural days and moments, I think are really interesting. And so I went to the Quest every year. Like the last year was -44 or something like that. It was awesome. I only got ice fog once. It was for the Quest. They couldn't have blessed me more. But so this juxtaposition was directly off culture. I kind of wanted to look more like, not exactly a voyeur, but I wanted to look like I was in the middle of each celebration, which is why I took the image with people's back turns, but using, the musher waving his hand in the top image and the different Mardi Gras Indians throwing their regalia. I wanted to put myself in the middle of it and kind of showcase that. And then, so this is the last one that I'll explicitly talk about. This is 504-907, the work. And so both of these images, again, are one of these things you might see on a walk. The top image is from New Orleans, out in the Bywater. No, I'm sorry. The bottom image is from the Bywater. That's not true. Do you believe in magic? And then the top is you get the mountains, which are a direct reference to Alaska. My bad, pimp, which I thought was really funny. But the name 504-907, the work, comes from that piece of graffiti that's cut out at the bottom that says the work. And what I wanted to say with this is all of these things, whether you want to take photos and make art, or if you want to, like, as a more grand thing, you want to try to stop climate change or put a pause on some of these things, it requires actual tangible work. And I know we all know that, but I think sometimes people, I read a great book this year called Katrina 1915 to 2015 by Andy Horowitz. And Horowitz makes a really compelling argument that America treats natural disaster as if it's God made, that God did it, that we didn't have anything to do with it. And in reality, we have so much to do with it. And the work, for good or for bad, is required in getting to somewhere. And I think there's a lot of people, like, at least when I was making the image, I thought there were a lot of people who needed to be reminded of that. And so that's what I have in relation to my slides. Any questions? I can talk more, obviously. I can yap away for a very long time if need be, but that's the slideshow itself.
Thank you. This was a great slideshow.
Thank you.
I'm curious how you came up with the subtitles for each of the pairings.
Yeah, so the work is directly from the work. One of a kind was kind of referencing the one of a kind cultural events. Faith was, these are direct places of faith, so it was sort of just pulling off that. Storefronts, because they're literally storefronts. A lot of them were rather literal. Same thing with sunglasses and chairs. Primary walks was more about the color signification, and then the lights was kind of about the lights. So it was a lot of just kind of pulling from what the image has and then naming it from there.
So do you just go out and shoot and then pair them later, or do you go out and shoot with a specific theme in mind?
No, so I go out and shoot. Basically, by the end of my MFA, the things I had in mind when I was shooting was doing dwellings, full buildings, those sort of quotidian things you would see on a walk, and then people. So I would orient towards that, but I'm basically a photographer that if I'm intrigued while I'm walking around, I'll take the photo. I don't think it's a bad thing to have too many. But so a lot of my curation was after the fact. It would be a lot of shooting, long periods of editing, and then working with the images from there.
And then have you considered doing like a triptych? Because you earlier had said you had 3 primary subjects.
Yeah, so I did do triptychs. I did do triptychs for a little while. What I learned is, and this is actually, me and Jason talked about this a lot, triptychs are hard. Like, triptychs are really hard. Like, diptychs are quite a bit easier because you can go back to back. But like, I had some of, maybe I can find it, but I had some from like of churches, and it didn't really work. It was like, you got 2 Louisiana churches, you got 1 Alaska church. It's like, it gets complicated. I think if I was doing 3 places, if I extended it out to somewhere, maybe in that situation, but I tried. It just didn't turn out.
Well, thank you, Miles. Any other questions?
I'm curious, how come you chose to go to Alaska to get your MFA?
So, all right, I did forget to say that. So I had a buddy from undergrad named Dakari, and Dakari got a job with the National Weather Service in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I was looking specifically for an MFA. I did not want an MA. And frankly, I didn't have a bad undergraduate GPA, but I didn't have a sparkling undergraduate GPA. And I wanted a place that you didn't have to take the GED or the GRE, excuse me, whatever it is. And I remember I did a Google search, because I was like, if my buddy can live in Fairbanks, why couldn't I? And so, and actually I had another friend who went to my university who she played women's soccer at the Division I level. She was from Fairbanks, moved to Monroe, Louisiana. And so I had some connections and I searched it and I was like, oh, there's a program. And then I saw Charles and I looked at Charles's work and I was like, oh, I kind of could make work like that. And so I sent Charles a cold email and I was like, this is who I am. Like, this is what I want to do. Could I talk to you? And we got on the phone. I was actually in Telluride, Colorado. I was outside of a grocery store and Charles was like, do you have any websites? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, your work's good. He was like, I would accept you. And he was like, I kind of have the choice if I want to accept you. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so there was that. And I knew I wanted to do the Alaska, Louisiana comparison. Like once it was in my head, I was like, wait, I was like, this is too perfect. In my brain, it was too perfect.
Yeah.
I think it's.
Yeah, I like how you use the area code, the 504 and the 907.
That was a very last minute thing. I kind of went back and forth with names for a while and I couldn't figure it out. And I remember we did our final meeting and I was like, what if I just did area codes? And everyone was like, they're like, yeah, okay. Because it signifies directly to whichever audience, and whichever audience doesn't know the other side, it's like, wait, what's that? Like, I think it's nice. I like it.
It's kind of funny looking at, I guess not funny. It's really revealing looking at your work and seeing the comparisons that I would have never thought to be there, because I've lived in Louisiana myself and I never thought, I thought that it was the polar opposite of Alaska, and yet there's so much in your work that says that that they are very similar to one another in so many ways, whether or not that's the urban decay, the fact that the environment affects and defines so much of what our structures look like, who we are as a people. It's admirable. It's really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
Other questions? No?
Thank you, Miles. Great talk. I just wonder if, are there any other projects that you're working on?
Yeah, so right now I have my major project at the current moment is it's called Shrouded Light. It's a digital infrared series I'm doing. So kind of similar subject matter, but kind of I've traveled to a lot of these national parks and you take these images that are sort of iconic that a lot of people have taken. And I've been kind of navigating with the infrared to see about flipping the way we view these things. And lately I've been doing a lot more urban based infrared images. And my thought process there has been infrared doesn't reflect off human structure usually. Sometimes if there's some greenery, it does, but by and large, it stays the same. And I think there's something interesting about these images being very pink, being very orange. You get this strange juxtaposition between the natural world and material world. And for me, it's sort of like a criticism of how much we've encroached upon natural space. And then also I've been making a story map through ArcGIS of the Carrollton Historic District. I want to do a mass photo survey of New Orleans, because even if it doesn't matter now, I hope it'll matter 30, 40 years from now if New Orleans really is not here.
Cool.
Yeah, those are my big things.
Wow.
I also have a trash series that I haven't done anything with yet, but it's going to be something. I take photos of trash in different places, and I think it's kind of compelling.
That's great. I love your energy. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think there were some comments.
This is Coral. Hi. I was going to just say thank you so much. And I really appreciate what you said about Louisiana and Alaska and the oil, and especially with all the political changes happening that is going to affect both places very much. So thank you for that. It was very mindful. I really appreciated it. And I loved hearing about the infrared. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm in the chat now. Let's see. Is there... And yeah, so in the question, in your opinion or work, is there a role community-led initiatives can pursue in promoting disaster resilience and addressing systematic inequalities? I do think so. I think one of the interesting things that I would love to do. So I didn't say this earlier, but I'm an anthropology PhD student at Louisiana State University, first year PhD student. And one of the things I've been interested in doing, and I would love to do this in both places. I had a student, and I was the instructor of record for a couple of basic digital photography classes. And one of my students, he's studying abroad right now, but he wants to do a mass photo survey of his community. For some reason, I'm blanking specifically on where he's from, but he's from like very far western Alaska, and basically like his native land is like falling off the face of the earth. And so I think I say all that to say, I think a community-led initiative where you can actually get cameras into the hands of people within a community, I think would be really important. I think also beyond just the photographs themselves being an important representation of a place, I think it's also important because they can really help policymakers in understanding what's important to a place, right? What they photograph, if in mass a group of people photographs all the same things, and maybe these are the cultural things that need to be restored or need to be looked at, you know, or in these situations where people have to be literally displaced and moved to a different place. If you have these old images, maybe there are ways of navigating, bringing some of that culture to a new location. That's my thought, trying to get cameras into natives' hands, not natives as in, you know what I mean, natives to a location. I think that would be really helpful. I mean, obviously, I want to photograph it all myself, and I'll make all the relationships, but I think there is something important about people photographing the place that they're from. Lena, thank you. That sounds very cool. Fairbanks in particular, I will say, shockingly good cuisine. I know people don't agree, but there's good restaurants in Fairbanks, man. So that would be fun. And then Gail, I'd love to know more about the story maps for your photos. I think story maps are a great position to do stuff with. I think it's a good way of facilitating different visual research outside of just the fine art realm.
Yeah, I'm a GIS analyst in my cool. career. So yeah, I came across story maps a couple years ago and have put some together for some work projects, and just said, oh man, I should do this for my photography. So nothing's near ready to publish yet, but yeah.
Yeah, I had to make one for a class last semester. So there's one that exists. It's not great, but it was fun to do. Our department is a geography and anthropology department, so we have overlap in that regard. So it's been cool to work within the cultural anthropology realm, but to use maps and to try to base it in more of a place.
And while I'm on here, I loved your presentation. I agree with Jason. I never would have put the two states together as similar, but it was amazing. So,
I mean, I will say, I think the thing I've been most thankful for with all of the feedback, and ironically, I've shown the show, or not the show itself, but I've shown pieces of the show in a bunch of different states, and most of them aren't Alaska and Louisiana. But the moments where Alaskans and Louisianians have been able to see it, a lot of the feedback is the same. The first thing is like, what? Like, how are these compared? Like, people get the climate part immediately about how much it contrasts, but it's been a lot of good feedback in that regard. People being like, wow, like these things can, you know. Frankly, I was thinking this last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever maybe even now, with all the California fires, I just think now, like, investigating how similar we are and investigating just what place means to people, I think is important. And, you know, so many people are potentially at risk for so many things that it's just, I don't want people to feel apart, right? I want people to feel together, and that can be a comparison or a contrast, but just at least asking the question, posing the question, you know? So, before I get too deep in the weeds.
No, that's great. I love it.
Thank you again, everyone, for showing up tonight, listening to Miles talk. Miles, I really appreciate being able to see your work and see you talk about it well, I guess it's been almost a year
I was
now.
thinking that.
Yeah.
I was thinking that earlier. I was like, wow, that was fast.
Yeah. And seeing how different you talk about it now. And so I really encourage people to keep on talking about whatever projects they're working on, because that evolves and you find new connections. And are you thinking about doing a part 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
I mean, I was thinking about that today with the snow. I was like, all right, time to go back to the archive.
Yeah, you can come up here during the summer and get it when it's 95 and all humid.
I've applied for some stuff, and that's kind of been my pitch. It's like, I want to extend this out, and I'm just going to come up and visit at some point, regardless. All my pieces of art are still up there, so I got to go get them.